All right. Let's see. All right. All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. All right. Yes, we've made it. Last class of the semester. That's great. So today, it's going to be pretty simple. As mentioned before, I want to talk about the section on ecofeminism, which is very brief, and then just sort of wrap everything up. And I just have a couple questions to put to the class by way of wrap up. But there are not too many of you here, so I don't know how long this will take us. What I'm saying is I don't think we'll be here for that long, right? Which I'm sure all of us are glad for. Not that we haven't had fun here, but it's been a busy semester for everyone, hasn't it? So let's do the old screen share. And then let's do this. Oops. The reason I wanted to talk about ecofeminism is to connect it to, oh my goodness, to make some connections with deep ecology, which Duzek sort of does here, and of course with the chapter on women, feminism and technology. There are a couple of chapters or a couple of sections in this chapter after this section, but there's just not enough time to cover them all and do them justice. There we go. Get myself out of the way here. And the first slide. So, yeah, can't finish the chapter, but we can look at ecofeminism briefly. And according to Duzek, ecofeminism is a movement combining ecological and feminist concerns. Ecofeminists claim that patriarchy, or male dominance of society, is linked to exploitative and destructive approaches to the environment. So this is, fairly in line with a lot of the things that we've already learned. If you recall from chapter 9, and Duzek sort of reiterates a lot of this in the present section, but this was a big thing in chapter 9, was the sort of male-female metaphor for science and technology and nature. Oh, more people are here, yay. So recall that nature is portrayed as female often. A few of the examples that come to mind in the present chapter are these sort of like these gendered terms being used for nature. Obviously, there's Mother Nature, right? Or Earth Mother, or Gaia, or whatever. But a few more examples that Duzek gives us are like virgin lands, which are, untouched forests or land that hasn't been farmed yet, right? Or if land has no resources, it's called barren, right? These sort of gendered terms, and kind of nasty gendered terms too, really, if you think about it, in some cases, are applied to nature. And science is of course portrayed as male. That was the other big standout from chapter 9, was Bacon's creepy sort of, like the scientist is like a man who has to seduce nature and penetrate the darkness. Yeah, it kind of makes me feel a little dirty. So yeah, that's that. Duzek continues, many ecofeminists claim that women by nature have more affinity for and sympathy with wild nature. Others claim that the structure of society with men in power structures gender roles and the personalities of men and women such that men are likely to take an attitude of domination over nature, while women tend to have more respect for and are oriented toward the protection of nature. We've touched on this before in chapter 9, I believe. And there is somewhat of a disagreement amongst feminists, kind of like an essentialist versus non-essentialist sort of debate, I suppose you could call it, where you have, feminist ecologists kind of advocating that there's this essentialism when it comes to gender, where women really are more caring and empathic, perhaps, and that makes them better at getting along with nature and not wanting to dominate it and take all of the resources and stuff. But then, of course, radical feminists will come along and say, whoa, there's some gender essentialism going on there. You got to remember, it's all a social construction, right? So there's some disagreement there, and disagreement also about whether, to take a step back and put your patriarchal scientist hat on. Maybe you're also an essentialist about gender, and yeah, sure, nature's female, science and technology are male, and men dominate nature, and blah blah blah. Both of those camps agree. The sort of ecofeminists and the traditional science outlook, I suppose, agree that women and men do have these essential traits. They just disagree about whether they're good or bad, or what they're good or bad for, right? It's the radical feminists who kind of take a hammer to all of that, as it were. But Karen Warren, an ecofeminist thinker, lists a number of ways that she thinks that patriarchy and anti-environmental attitudes are linked together. There are, of course, the linguistic links that we've already noted. The male-female, technology, nature dichotomy, right? But there are some other conceptual or linguistic links, including the sorts of hierarchical thinking in terms of male attributes and their supposed superiority over female attributes, right? And I say these are conceptual / linguistic. Same goes for the nature metaphor we've been talking about, nature as female metaphor we've been talking about all this time. Because obviously the way we talk about things reflects the way we think about things. And also talking about things in such and such a way can not only be a reflection of what we think, but how we think. So that's why I say conceptual there as well. So a few of these allegedly superior and inferior attributes are like reason and emotion, mind and body, culture, nature, and of course, man nature. The first one is the stereotypically male attribute, right? Reason. Men are reasonable and women are emotional, it is said traditionally. Of course, I think, I think that these are false dichotomies. It's not that men are reasonable and women are emotional. Men and women are both reasonable and emotional. And they may be so in different ways, right? I mean, I think it's certainly true that a lot of men, and this is probably due to culture and society and whatnot, but a lot of men are emotional. They just don't express it necessarily the same way as women might, right? And of course, the whole reason emotion thing, we saw this before. Reason, there's just no good argument you can make in biology, rooted in biology, that men are inherently more reasonable than women. There's no good evidence. It's just stop it. Also, emotions are not inherently unreasonable. I mean, emotions have a purpose. Emotions evolved. Emotions are a survival tool. They evolved for a reason, to let you know that important stuff is happening and what that stuff is and what it might mean for you. That's what emotions are for. And men and women have them both. So, I mean, come on. The whole mind and body, the superiority of the mind over the body. Of course, the mind is, it's similar to this: reason, mind. These are stereotypically male attributes. Culture and nature, man and nature. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. So anti-environmentalism, Warren thinks, is linked to the hierarchical thinking that we're sort of stuck with, in thinking that some of these male attributes are actually superior. I know. Yeah, and that's really what the postmodernists and radical feminists are kind of trying to do, right? Is trying to deconstruct, like when you hear that deconstruction, right? This is for everyone, by the way. The idea of deconstruction refers to deconstructing these sort of artificial binaries or false dichotomies. And one of these binaries, is nature, maybe science and nature. Another one might be male and female. So yeah, and why must they all be I don't know. People are weird. People used to think, like, I kind of think of it's almost like a relic of magical thinking. This is my own little take on it as a sort of cognitive scientist guy. I'm not a very good postmodern philosopher or anything like that, but I think I'm okay scientist, and I've got a little pet hypothesis about magical thinking. People used to think that different properties of things would affect us in certain ways. Think of when we used to be sick and we'd get a fever. People would think your blood is too hot, so you need to drink something that's cold, or something. Or if you're angry, maybe your blood is too hot. Yeah, or maybe you need to do some bloodletting. I was talking to a friend that I used to work with. This is my favorite example, and it's very anecdotal, and I'm not trying to make my friend look silly, but we were talking, and my friend believed in homeopathy. And I was just kind of smiling and nodding, because I think homeopathy is founded in some bad ideas, we'll say, about how the body works and how chemistry works, and just kind of like how science works. But anyway, so he was telling me about, for example, how what foods you should eat. And I'm like, tell me, I want to get the homeopath's perspective. So he says, like, well, so say, for example, you're having problems with your pancreas. I was like, okay. Well, in nature, we can see that the sweet potato, he explains, is similar in shape to the pancreas. Okay, tell me more. So we know that the sweet potato is the food of the pancreas, and we need to eat sweet potatoes because they're good for our pancreases. And I was like, right. Cool. That's not how it works, of course, right? But we think like, oh, the maybe the sweet potato looks like your pancreas. So if you want to have a healthy pancreas, eat lots of sweet potato. This is magical thinking. Another example is like a lot of aphrodisiacs in like traditional Chinese medicine come from yeah, pancreas looks like pancreas. Maybe I should eat a lot of pancreas. Maybe. They call that sweet bread, don't they? Like offal in some cuisines. I mean, you can have offal. That's where you eat your guts. the organs rather than the flesh. You know, you get your steak and kidney pie, your sweetbread, you got your liver, obviously. Lots of good stuff there. Anyway, what? Oh, maybe it is the throat. I actually don't know, but I know that someone's probably eating it. We've figured out ways to eat everything. I mean, it's crazy. It's good, I guess. It's not wasteful. For the thymus or pancreas. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So they're both sweetbreads. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, interesting. Delicious. Actually, I don't know. It might be. I've never tried it. So, you know, you have these ideas like what I was saying in traditional Chinese medicine. Some aphrodisiacs come from creatures with horns, like rhinoceroses. Well, why would a powder made from a creature's horn make a good aphrodisiac? Well, look at that rhinoceros horn. It's like the size of my arm. Might be good for you know, something else. So this is magical thinking. And I think that over the years, maybe some thinkers thought, oh, you know, there's a lot of pairs out there, right? There's the sun and the moon. There's men and women. There's night and day, hot and cold. So there's all these dualities, and I guess they gendered them because they were like, well, there's men and women, and there's the sun and the moon. One of them's got to be male or female. Ugh, I don't know. I think it's kind of related to that kind of magical thinking. That's what I think. So I would explain that in terms like almost like a psychological explanation. Whereas a postmodern philosopher would say, oh, you've got a social construction there and you need to deconstruct it, right? That's what they would say. But, you know, Judeo-Christian religious philosophy also holds that humans are superior to nature and that men are superior to women. So it's not like this is coming out of a vacuum, right? In Judeo-Christian philosophy, well, just look in the book of Genesis, right? God creates the world in 6 days and he rests on the 7th day. And he makes the world in the Garden of Eden. He does the garden. And every plant and animal, everything in there is for Adam, right? So Adam, the man of earth. There's actually 2 different creation accounts in the book of Genesis. In one, God just creates Adam and Eve. And in the other one, God makes Adam first and then makes Eve out of Adam's rib. And says like, oh, okay, that's your wife now, Adam. I made you a wife, basically. And in the New Testament, you have things like where in some of the epistles, you know, the letters that Paul wrote. Paul used to write a lot of letters because he was literate and he was a Roman citizen, so he could like travel around and spread the gospel. So he went around writing all these letters to different people, and in one of the letters he reminds women that they got to submit to their husbands or else, because that's what God says. So God's going to get you if you don't. This is in the Old Testament too, by the way. This isn't exclusively from the New Testament. The Old Testament gets pretty Old Testament about patriarchy. So yeah. But are there any other parallels in other religions and philosophies? Or can we think of some religions and philosophies that are maybe a bit different, that don't alienate us from nature and don't teach the superiority of men over women? Well, I've got one. Think of the Hellenistic tradition, you know, Greek rationalism and whatnot. Kind of similar to this, if you think about it, except it's more about reason. It's not like, oh, God said, here's your wife, Adam, or St. Paul said, submit to your husbands, ladies. It's just kind of like, look, think about it, like Aristotle, right? Oh, well, men are the most rational and women are not, so men need to rule over them. And we can stand apart from nature, right? And we can understand the nature using our reason, right? So that's very similar, actually. What else? Any other examples? Maybe not. I don't know a whole lot about Islam, but in my understanding of Islam is that um, it's not like the whole world and all the animals are just for us. It's really Christianity that's like, oh, all this stuff is for us that we can use. These animals here, we can farm them, eat them, no problem. God put them there for us, no big deal. But I think in Islam, it's a little that's not really emphasized as much. And for example, like when animals are slaughtered, every time an animal is slaughtered, it has to be blessed, right? It's the same in Judaism. Whereas in Christianity, you can just go and kill an animal and eat it and say grace before dinner and you're fine, right? But according to the dietary laws in Judaism and Islam, you need to like you can't just kill an animal. You have to like bless it and kill it and say you're doing it in the name of God. So and that's always struck me as a little bit more respectful, I guess. Although the way that the animals die is not very nice. They just kind of bleed out. So there's, I guess, positives and negatives there. But I'm not judging. So yeah, well, let's move on then. Excuse me. Slow computer. Oh, there we go. Another thing that ecofeminists have drawn our attention to is that the contributions of women in developing countries get ignored. And this is especially true with respect to agriculture. And this is a problem because when Western countries are sending aid to these nations, the aid packages that we send ignores women. Often we focus exclusively on industrial or agribusiness development, which is dominated by males in the developing world. We don't really focus on things like subsistence farming, which are dominated by the women. So another thing, well, we'll talk about this after, but another important point, which I'm very surprised Duzic has not touched on at all, not even in the chapter that was all about women, feminism, and technology. He does, well, I guess he says a little bit about it, but education needs like a lot more discussion in this book, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Ecofeminists also criticize deep ecology. That's the interesting thing. They claim that it partakes of the same male-dominated abstract thinking that they're trying to criticize, and it originated in patriarchal thinking too. So Duzic writes, Ariel Sella notes that founder Arne Naess, remember the Norwegian founder of ecofeminism, formulates his presentation in terms of the analytic and positivistic philosophy with which he began his career as a philosopher. Naess speaks of axioms and deductive consequences and of intuitions that need to be made precise. He also compares his approach to general systems theory. Sala and other ecofeminists see this as a masculinist betrayal of the real implications of deep ecology, which they say would lead away from a formalistic and technocratic approach to knowledge. So maybe deep ecologists are not doing it right. They're still subject to the patriarchy, right? Whether they realize it or not. Nonetheless, deep ecology and ecofeminism probably have more in common with one another than either do with, quote, the technocratic and managerial utilitarian approach to environmental and wildlife management. So that's nice. And Duzek continues, the irony pointed out by Worcester and Bowler, among others, is that scientific ecology itself, as it becomes more rigorous and quantitative, is enshrined as a professionalized academic subject and reaches for more influence on government and corporate policy, is generally moving far away from its original romantic and organismic inspirations in a technocratic direction, often in conflict with the personal opinions concerning preservation of wild nature of the ecological sciences themselves. It remains to be seen whether the collaboration of scientists with, or at least having the support for, the aims of the Green Movement will shift the science itself back onto a more holistic path. It does remain to be seen, yes, but I'm hopeful for the future. Now, so as ecology, which is, I guess, as it becomes more professionalized, and as more governments and corporations listen to ecology as a discipline and allow it to inform policy, ecology itself becomes more and more technocratic, right? So this is a problem with deep ecology and ecofeminism, is we have to make sure it doesn't get sucked back into this sort of rigid patriarchal science, this technocratic, bureaucratic stuff. We don't want it. So that's deep ecology. Why, just to get back to that point I was going to make, one thing that I'm really surprised Duzek hasn't touched on is education. Because that is the way that you bring women in, that you bring a lot of people, not just women, out of poverty in developing countries. Educate women. Because when women are educated in developing countries, they tend to have fewer children. So families get smaller, and work habits change. Women can, with a college education, they don't have to be a subsistence farmer or a mother. They can go and do something else. This is what will get developing nations developed, right? And it's good for everybody. It's not just good for women. It's good for men too, and children, because it helps make things more sustainable. And I'm just surprised that Duzek doesn't really talk about that in this chapter, because this could have really striking environmental impacts. Developing countries can develop like the West developed in the Industrial Revolution and pollute the heck out of everything, or maybe they could be smarter about it than we were, and use more green technology. So yeah, I'm just surprised that Duzek doesn't really mention that. He mentions education in, in the context of like, women couldn't go to university until the 19th century or the 20th century or whatever. He mentions that, but he doesn't talk about how, like, hey, maybe we should teach girls in the developing world to read, like that is important, and he doesn't really talk about it. So yeah, there's a point that green technology is perhaps rather specialized to produce. Yeah, well, yeah, I would say, but that is starting to change, right? I mean, solar technology, although we still have the issue of like reliability to contend with, because half of all time on Earth is nighttime, right? So we need a way to have enough solar energy and a way to store it and move it around that's efficient. But solar is now cheaper than coal. Wind is cheaper than coal. And production is ramping up of all these kinds of wind turbines, solar panels. It's really growing. It's really taking off. It's taking off now that it's cheaper. Now that it's cheaper than coal, it's also appealing to investors. And I think this is something that we're going to see in developing nations, especially developing nations that kind of want to keep in touch with their roots, right? Like I'm talking about like traditional ways of living. If certain cultures within a developing country, have certain relationships to the land, like the way that the First Nations in Canada try to make hunting and fishing sustainable, or try to make the extraction of natural resources sustainable, because they look at the land differently than like a Western capitalist does. A Western capitalist says like, oh, there's some resources there. Gimme, I can have that. I can make some money. But the First Nations kind of understand it as like, well, there's the land. It's not really ours. We're stewards. We have to take care of it. We have to make sure it's there for future generations, right? So maybe if similar sort of closer to nature ideas can inform technological development in the developing world, that would be kind of cool, I think. Anyway, I guess this is just a really roundabout way of saying I'm surprised Duzic doesn't talk about this, but there's a lot about this book that, I don't know. I think of this book as a good primer. Now that I've read through most of it, reread through most of it, it's a good primer. It's a good like book to have on your shelf for looking something up. If you need a quick read, like, oh, philosophy of science, I can't remember, read that chapter, you're up to speed, right? But of course, Duzic doesn't really make very many arguments. And I just think that like that's something you ought to do in a philosophy book, is make some kind of argument for something. Anyway, we've made it, guys. We've reached the end of the class, and it's only 8 minutes after 12. Oh, excuse me. So that's nice. So one of my little reflections for the end of the course is that I think I'm probably going to use a different textbook the next time I teach this. I don't know which textbook, but I don't think this is a bad book. It's just perhaps better as a sort of primer or a reference rather than a text for a class like this. So if I teach this class again, I think I'm going to try and use a different book. But how about you all? Now that we've finally reached the end, what has struck you the most about, that's supposed to say the philosophy of technology, not the philosophy and technology. What has struck you most about the philosophy of technology? And has this class changed the way you think about technology? We can just, little discussion. We don't have to take up the rest of the scheduled time. But yeah, anyone have any thoughts? All right, here we go. So, interested in the idea of varying rationalities. Oh boy, excuse me. That potentially dominate technology. Instrumental rationality was an unknown for me prior to this. Yeah. Different ways of reasoning, right? And the way we reason with technology. That's something that's always fun to learn about. I remember I learned about that when I was an undergraduate as well. Like, what? There are different ways of reasoning, and some of them are bad. I'm not talking about ways like, like fallacies, but like instrumental reasoning, which I guess, like we learned earlier, needs a higher principle to guide it, right? Like when I think of instrumental reason, I think of like the Borg from Star Trek. I don't know if anybody knows the Borg or Star Trek, but you know, they're a race of cyborgs who want to assimilate everybody, right? Resistance is futile. They're often used, that phrase is kind of taken on a life of its own in pop culture, and is used when you're standing in the face of some kind of like gigantic, overwhelming enemy, like Disney, I guess. I don't know. I think of Disney buying all these IPs, you know, it's like the Borg assimilating everybody. Anyway, that reminds me of instrumental reason. We got to have more stuff, you know, got to assimilate. Why? Perfection. But really? We need principles to inform the way we reason instrumentally. AC says, for me personally, I found the section on reproductive technology interesting. I guess I never really considered things like IUDs and the other stuff we mentioned technology. Yeah, and isn't that funny? Like more broadly, we can, and this is why this was one of the first things we discussed, was what is technology? Well, that was chapter 2, right? Because what is it really? I feel like I'm a lot less certain. I think that when I came into this class, personally speaking, I was a bit of an essentialist about technology. Not crazy, but I was like, yeah, there must be some kind of essential nature. But now I'm less certain about that. I don't know if I'm an anti-essentialist. You know, I don't know if I'm like a postmodernist about technology, but I'm certainly much less certain that I know what it is. You know, like my phone is technology, for sure. Everybody would agree. But is this fidget spinner technology? What does it do? I mean, is that technology, or is that just some kind of interesting novelty? Right? I don't know. Certainly fun to think about. And Tess says, good idea on the different book, I think. I often found it frustrating to see Duzek characterizing and summarizing all sorts of philosophers' thoughts without direct quotes, references, quotations, pointers to where to actually look to be convinced that the summary was actually representative of their thought. Yeah. Duzek relies a lot on you knowing what he's not telling you, right? Like the history of philosophy. He does do a bit of this in the first and second chapters, and then it kind of like slows down a lot with his quotes, right? So I agree. I will probably go with, I met David Gunkel once at a conference. He was cool. Maybe I could use his book. I don't know. What struck me most is how the technology as a tool definition, albeit being widespread and somewhat intuitive to use, is very limiting in terms of describing what technology really is. The system's definition of technology changed the way I think about it. I agree. And that's kind of where, I guess what I was saying before, I was a bit of an essentialist. Like technology is an artifact and it does a thing and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not so sure now. I definitely don't think technology has to just be a tool. Some tools may not be technology. I mean, if you're a Heidegger, you think that craft and technology are completely different, right? So a homemade shoe made by a master cobbler is not technology, but a mass-produced sneaker in a sweatshop is, right? So anyway, there are philosophers that talk about more than one modernity happening at the same time in the globe instead of globalized and universal modern Eurocentric project. I don't know if I think this is true, but it is interesting to think of other ways of reasoning as able to criticize or crystallize in modernizing projects. Yeah, that's something that's interesting to think about for sure. Yeah, whether it's true or not, I mean, we unfortunately, this is still a thing. Eurocentrism in academia is still pretty big, but certainly there were periods in time where other areas were much more modern than Europe was. The Dark Ages, I mean, come on, they weren't that dark. But if you took a quick hop over to the Middle East during the Dark Ages in Europe, you would have found something that looked really modern and spiffy and cool, doing all kinds of science. If you had gone back to ancient Greece, you would have found a society just as advanced as 17th century Europe. So yeah, it's true. But yeah, it's interesting to think of these ways of reasoning and what they allow us to do. Oh, that's it. Okay. Well, that's awesome. A lot of different thoughts there. I don't really have anything else to say. That's it. That's all I have planned. But I imagine that everybody kind of wants to get on with their day, and you've got final papers and final exams and other classes to worry about, I'm sure. And as for me, I want to spend this week working on getting you your grades for your proposals so that you have some feedback as you're working on writing them. Oh, okay. Yeah, Stefan, if you want to talk about the final paper, yeah, go ahead, ask away. I can, if there's any questions about that or anything else, shoot, let me know and I will answer them right now. I guess I don't need to share my screen anymore. Well, the idea behind the proposal is that it gives you a gives you kind of like the first couple paragraphs. So you could reuse it word for word, and that would be fine. That's like kind of like the one exception, because the whole point of the proposal was to give you something that could serve as the beginning of your paper, right? So you can reuse it. You don't need to cite anything. You don't need to cite your proposal. Just reuse it word for word. But probably don't do it word for word, because I'm going to give you some feedback and you're going to want to make some tweaks, right? Or you might want to change it, change like from in this proposal to in this paper and those sorts of changes. But yeah, you can absolutely reuse everything. Yeah, it's fine. If you're going to cite anything else, well, even if it's your own work, like a previous critical response, if you're going to use it, cite it. You can quote from it, cite it properly. All quotes need to be in quotation marks. If you're doing long indented quotes, they have to be indented properly, right? Make it very clear when you're quoting and citing. Make it very clear, because although I've been kind of understanding when mistakes happen with citation in your critical responses, and so is Liam. In the final paper, if something is not cited correctly, that's plagiarism. This is your final exam, so we're taking this seriously, right? So, but you can absolutely reuse. You can just copy and paste your proposal, although probably not. You probably want to make it better based on my feedback or something, right? So yes. Any other questions about that? You're welcome. Yeah, any other questions about the final? Anyone else? Of course, if you think of anything, I can be reached via email very easily, and you can also reach me on the Discord server. It's not like I shut that down when classes end. I'm on the server. If people ask me questions, I tend to answer pretty quickly, and I will continue to check my email. I check my email like multiple times a day, even during the exam period. So if there's anything at all, I can easily be gotten a hold of. So yeah, just saying. But if there's anything else before we go, then I'll stick around here. Looks like everybody's quiet though, so yeah, it looks like we're done then. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thanks, Vicente. This has been interesting. As I said, like at the beginning of the class, you know, I've always been interested in this, but I've never got the chance to teach on it. So this was a learning experience for me too. And I enjoyed it. I think that it was really awesome. I think my favorite part about this class, least favorite was the textbook. My favorite part was having a class where I had so many people that actually weren't philosophers. I have a lot of people in this class from elsewhere besides philosophy, all interested in technology. And I thought that was the coolest part, getting to hear from people outside of my usual area of interest in these discussions about technology and all the related stuff. So that was the best part for me. I really enjoyed that. So thank you, everybody, for being in the class and for being a part of my own learning journey, which I had. And now next time I teach this class, it's going to be even better because I'll have the experience of this course and I'll know to use a different textbook. So yeah, cheers, everyone. So if there's nothing else, let's wrap it up. You can get a hold of me via email and all of that stuff. Yeah, sociology. See, and look, I learned a lot about sociology this semester too when we were talking about Weber and all those guys, right? So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I feel like my appreciation of the philosophy of science has improved. Yeah, I did get a lot out of this, and I hope you all did too. So yeah, cheers. Thanks, AC. Yeah, okay, that's it. You can go now if you want. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for this class. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, have a good summer. Thank you, guys, and I'll get you your feedback for your proposals as soon as humanly possible. I'm so sorry for the slow grading. That's the other thing that needs to improve for next time. But thank you so much for bearing with me, people, and I'll get you your feedback soon. Okay. All right. Great job, everyone. Enjoy your break. Work hard on your final papers and rest. Have a little relaxation. Okay. You've all earned it. Take it easy. And hopefully I'll see some of you again in the future. Bye.